great anticipation for what the government has planned for the country this financial year. The Minister of Finance and Public Enterprise, Iipumbu Shiimi, is preparing to table the 2023-2024 budget in the National Assembly tomorrow. Today, we talk to the Managing Director of High Economic Intelligence, Salomo Hei, to give us his analysis on the budget and also to touch on the factors that influence the budget. Salomo, good evening and welcome to the Daily Roundup.
Good evening and thank you for having me.
Salomo, do you think the public is engaged enough when it comes to drawing up this budget? And if not, does the lack of public engagement create mistrust perhaps towards government?
Thank you, Nina. I think there are different stages of engagement in relation to the budget process. I think you would know that the budget process comes from the different ministries or from the different departments, if it were. And those ministries or departments are really the interface between government and the public. So what it means is that, for instance, if there's a need for the budget process in terms of preparation for health, for instance, there would be a budget process or a business plan that the Ministry of Health sort of submit to the Ministry of Finance and Public Enterprise. So that particular business plan is then informed by the service deliveries that the Ministry of Health provides to the public. So, for instance, if there are a lack of hospital beds in the Karutura hospital, for instance, the public have got every right to raise those issues with the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health then obviously should make sure that particular need or demand is then raised through the business plan that they raise for funding through the Minister of Finance and Public Enterprise. So there is engagement taking place. Whether the follow-through mechanisms around those engagements reflect the aspirations and needs of the public is obviously what the budget now should encompass, and this is where the discussion should be. In terms of how the public engagement should take place, again, that's a different conversation. But over and above that, there is definitely an engagement, and the public should make sure that as they interface with respective departments or with the respective ministries, some of the issues are raised sharply and subsequently they then become budget items within the financial year.
Salomo, what are the factors that influence the budget?
So the factors that influence the budget is one, is the revenue. In terms of what is the revenue collection, what is the revenue numbers that the ministry or that the country has at that point in time. So what tax are we collecting? What is the number? What is the figure on corporate tax? What is the figure on income tax? What is the figures on SACU receipts as revenue sources? So that's one. Secondly, you then need to look at your expenditure, and this expenditure obviously comes from the different ministries or the different departments, if it were. Thereafter is obviously an important consideration is debt. What are the current debt levels that we have as a country? The other factor that's quite important is perhaps the external environment. The external environment in terms of the global economic outlook, how is the economy performing globally? What are the concerns around the external environment? What could happen within the external environment? And subsequently, how does Namibia position itself to make sure that it's able to anticipate or proactively engage what could potentially happen? So, for instance, you remember that when COVID started, the external environment was of such a nature that there was a move to start looking inward, and subsequently we had to do the same as a country. So in a nutshell, those are really the sort of main factors that goes into consideration for the budget, because remember that there's also a need to be able to make sure that through the budget appropriation, economic activity can be accelerated, and subsequently create opportunities that could come through jobs, incentives for SMEs, and. And then there's also the issue around the most vulnerable in our society, which is essentially those that are on social welfare. How will they be treated? How is that funded, etc. So those are the sort of high-level factors that are taken into consideration when the budget is being drawn up.
You recently mentioned that despite the education and health sectors receiving the lion's share of the budget over years, Namibia has been unable to reap the dividends from this investment. Talk to us about, how you think this can be changed.
Well, what has happened is that there needs to be a certain level of accountability, because remember that public finances is government investment into the economy. So there needs to be a certain level of a return on that investment. The sort of appropriation that goes to education should be able to give us outcome-based results, to the extent that if you're spending the appropriation that we are spending on education, we should be able to have a highly skilled labor force, for instance. We should be able to produce high-quality graduates that's able to extend their qualifications or what they have learned was in higher education into the economy. Now, if you have the sort of grade 10s and grade 12s that are falling through the cracks in terms of the number of failure, for lack of a better word, or those that are not progressing out of a school system, it means that somewhere along the line, perhaps we could be missing the boat, and subsequently that's why we are having these huge dropouts from grade 10 and grade 12, and subsequently not being able to get into university. And then what happens thereafter as well is that the graduates at some point are unable to become productive graduates in the economy, and whether they are not being absorbed by the economy because they are not ready for the job market, or perhaps the learning outcomes that they get does not prepare them adequately for the job market. So these are the considerations that we need to have. So we should be able to link the appropriation that we give to a certain level of a dividend that should come as a consequence of it. And unfortunately, we've not been able to do that over the past years. And if you look at the appropriation over the years, we did a calculation from 1990 to current year 2022, 2023, financial year, which is ending now in March. So for every Namibian dollar that was spent on education, 18 cents of that went to education. And unfortunately, and that's quite a big number. The 18 cents is quite a big number. So what is it that we can show for that particular figure? What is it that we can show to demonstrate that the school system, the higher education system, is able to produce productive citizens that can then further add value in the economy? There are few, obviously, that are coming through, but I think there is a concern of the number that's falling through the cracks. And this is essentially perhaps what we would want to see Honorable Iipumbu Shiimi speaks about tomorrow, in terms of how do we then create a situation where we are able to measure this 19 cents out of a dollar that we have spent on education in the value addition or proportionally to the economy that we want to see.
Just as we round off our discussion, just briefly, perhaps you can talk to me about, the budget that will be tabled tomorrow, as we mentioned earlier, and what changes you would like to see.
Well, I think the first is that obviously there's a general need to understand the appropriation in the context of a developing economy, in terms of the development budget. I think it's important that, at some point that we are able to sort of really have a certain percentage, if it were, to the capital budget that will translate into a certain level of economic growth, because essentially that's really what will propel the economy from a government perspective But that again is linked to the revenue that we collect or the revenue that the state has at any point in time. Our projection is that there would be an increase in revenue collection. So it means that it could potentially have a positive impact on our current deficit. But at the same time, I think it could slightly sort of remove the shackles for an expanded, I don't know to what extent, but an expanded development budget. So we will hope that comes to fruition. Obviously, I think this is the one budget that the Honorable Minister would really have a bit of room, to maneuver in terms of spending. And I think that could happen. The other thing that we want to see really is that accountability for spending. There would also need to be a bit of clarity in terms of the mid-core situation, what's going to happen to mid-core. We would also anticipate a bit of clarity on Transnamid in terms of the importance thereof. Remember that now we have even removed passports as a basis for traveling between Botswana and Namibia. We gave, or Namibia donated a dry port to Botswana. So the anticipation is that trade between the two countries will increase. We know that we've got a railway that runs into Hobart. So we want to understand we want to understand the plans about the rehabilitation of the railway to be able to carry some of these trade activities. There would also be an interesting observation that has actually come to the fore in the last 2 days. I think there could be an announcement on Air Namibia in terms of the thinking around that, whether Air Namibia is coming back. So over and above that, I think again there could be a cushion with towards the social sector, where potentially there could be an increase in terms of the current social welfare allocation. I think there could be tax amendment as well in respect of the minimum tax threshold, and perhaps there could be a bit of certainty around the investment bill in terms of how we're moving with that, or when will that eventually be tabled to be gazetted, so that at least there's certainty around the investment climate. So those are the sort of expectations that we have around the budget tomorrow. But I think over the past 3-4 odd years that Dr. Shiimi has been at the helm, I think this is really the best time that he might have a bit of room to maneuver as we sort of now look at the consequences of fiscal consolidation that we had over the years, and to what extent perhaps we can try and get going again, given the increase, given the anticipated increase on the revenue side.
Salomo Hei, thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you for joining us here on the Daily Roundup.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to take a short break. Our conversations continue. Stay with us.